Welcome to Heal Through Humor, the podcast designed for you to learn about yourself and laugh along the way. In each episode, we'll explore the healing power of humor as I sit down with guests to talk about mental health, relationships, self-growth, and the ever-evolving world of social media. I'm your host, Talia Bombola. Let's get started. So this is off to a great start. For those of you who have already tuned in, for those of you who are already listening to us laughing, we're in another episode of Heal Through Humor. Today's guest is Dr. Jessica Higgins, who I met when I was on your podcast not so long ago. And then I got an email. I was actually thinking about reaching out to you. And at that day, I ended up getting an email from your assistant. I was like, okay, universe, like you have very good hearing. So it worked out really well. So now you're here. And I'll let you take it away and introduce yourself, and we'll just see where it goes.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to share this time with you. I very much appreciate meeting other experts in the field that are doing really great work. I loved your episode and
Thank you.
I think I was commenting, I'm like, how you mentioned you have a photographic memory.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, must be nice. You're just like dropping all this like research and theory. And I love it. I reference, but I don't know that I have the always exact citation in my head.
Yeah.
Well, I guess all that to say is, speaking of psychology, I mean, I am bridging, like many people, the field of psychology as a psychologist. I'm a licensed psychologist, but I'm also doing a lot of relational coaching and helping people navigate relationship from a coaching perspective. And I think that's a nice frame. I think a lot of times when we are supporting people in developing new patterns and really looking at new moves, getting maybe out of old patterns that were effective at some point, but we're looking at how to up-level them. It does take a coaching lens. I remember when people were asking me, what's the difference between, coaching and being a therapist? And I was like, honestly, all therapists are trained to coach. It's just coaches are not trained to do mental health therapy. Correct. So I don't think people really recognize that, although I do have coaching certifications. But just bigger broad stroke, I've always, since a very young age, been interested in people and why they do what they do, and just tuning into the emotional world and relational dynamics. And I always knew I wanted to be a psychologist when I was in middle school.
Love it.
People were always like, oh, you must be lucky. And I'm actually like, it's a pretty wide field. I've taken a whole meander of various sorts. I did my master's in child and adolescent. I worked with teens. That was like a whole field of my in of itself. And then I went back and got a second, PhD, postgraduate degree. And I had a couple topics I was interested in, but relationship was very much near to my heart, my own journey. And that just set me on my dissertation and then just kind of my focus in my career. So
what would you say the difference is when you're working with somebody in the therapeutic sense on a relationship versus the coaching sense on a relationship? Is it more directive when you coach them, like, stop saying this? I mean, that's how I am as a therapist, but I'm curious what the difference is.
Well, I think less about me. I think people in the field would say a lot of the, I know you would agree with this because you were very much like, so many of our patterns are developed in childhood.
100%.
And I do think therapeutic coaching can reference that and really bring light to that. I think there's a lot of crossover. So I would say when we start really doing trauma work in the relational, like early attachment dynamics, that tends to be more psychology than coaching.
For sure. Definitely.
What would you say?
I think for when I do my relationship coaching versus treat couples, the biggest difference is that I don't see couples as a coach. I only see individuals. They'll bring in their partner through story, I call it. Like, so I kind of help in the relationship because I'll be like, oh, I had a fight with my boyfriend and this is what happened. What should I do? And that's more the coaching is like the here and now.
Yes.
We might reference the past. It's like, oh, well, instead of doing this thing that you used to do in your fights with your parents in childhood, why don't you try this? But that's about as deep as it goes in coaching some of the time. In therapy, it's letting the client arrive at their own insight. And especially with the couples I'm working with, a lot of it is them like enacting it in front of me and me being like, well, that's a projective identification. It's far more psychoanalytic. That definitely comes through in coaching, but not the same. Coaching, I'm much more blunt and real, and I'm like, stop doing that. Like, I tell them more what they want to hear versus therapy. I'm like, what would it be like if you were to stop doing that? Like, it's
Yes.
more of
Does
their
that,
own autonomy. Yeah.
yeah. Tell me more about what does that feel like in your
Yeah.
body and,
Yeah.
and what
All
comes
the
up for
memes.
you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
All those reels are exactly it. And then with coaching, I'm like, cut it out. They're like, okay, got it. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
my difference anyway.
So double checking, were you asking the difference between couples therapy and couples coaching, or were you asking between individual and couples?
Like, how do you, in your relationship coaching, how do you treat a relationship versus when you're in your therapy lens? Do you see them, do you see it differently
Okay.
as like the perspective you have? How do you treat a
Yes.
relationship in each?
Okay. So whether or not I'm doing individual or couples.
Yeah.
Okay. I
Yeah.
just wanted to clarify because I was
Yeah.
like, are
No,
you
that's a great
using
question.
relational as like individual relationship focused work? I got
Yeah.
just, so I think I
Oh, a
answered.
good clarification. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
could actually dissect that for the whole
That's an entire episode right there. Yeah. So you got started on it because I also fell in love with therapy in middle school, but that's because I became a patient in middle school.
Oh, wow.
Lifelong
Mhm.
patient, truly. Like, I feel like that's where my adolescence really started, and my frontal lobe was raised on therapy, which is not what I can say. Some of the therapists I've met similar, but a lot of the people I've met in this field, they started therapy when they were in grad school, or they started therapy for a different reason, maybe later in life, or they got divorced and that's what led them to want to become a therapist, second career, what have you. It's
Right.
not totally rare, but it's just, I think, more common that it was later in life that people got started. So what was it for you in middle school? Did you like see a TV show? Were you also like a therapist client in middle school and you're like, oh, I could do this for a job? Because that's how I felt. I'm like, this is a job. This is so easy. Like this, I mean,
Yeah.
I made it. I made my therapist work for it. I was a tough client, but I was just going through a lot in my adolescence, like most teenagers do.
Yes, for sure. That's a great question. I've never had anyone ask me that. Well, I would say one of the big influencers was my mother. She was doing her own therapy
Got it.
and being very communicative about her process, perhaps running the risk of being a little parentified at times, for
Same.
sure.
Yeah.
Uh, and whether, I mean, it is a little curious to me, I will say, had she not reflected back to me, I do think I have a skill or an inclination, whether or not it's intuitive or empathic or just super curious. She said, even as an infant, I was like smiling at people, trying to engage them. I do love people, and that
Yeah.
is evident. So whether or not she reflected that back to me, which then, as you know, likely gave more focus to it, which
Yeah.
then created, but
Template.
had she not, I'm not sure, but I did, to be fair, had my own traumas growing up. Uh, Parent died,
Mm,
exposure to, there was all kinds of T's, big
yeah.
T's.
Yeah.
And uh, I did get into therapy sprinkled, I wouldn't say intently in my adolescence. I did go, it was more my mother and I working out our conflict where we went
Yes.
to therapy.
Yes.
But I was exposed, which had a profound impact on me. It was actually a non denominational youth group or
Okay.
just program that
Yeah.
I was a part of from, I would say, even childhood, that was very focused on character development, positive psychology. It was very new thought. If anybody is in the LA area, they may have heard Agape or Michael
Mm-hmm.
Beckwith. And so it was that
Mm-hmm.
similar philosophy, science of mind, but I would say they Christian based, but very, I mean, the church that I grew up no longer exists, but she was honoring all the world's religions, the minister. So we had the season of nonviolence and the Dalai Lama. Like there were all people
Wow.
in the personal growth, like Gary Zukav
Sphere.
and Marianne Williamson, and like all
Oh,
these big
wow.
names coming
Yeah.
to the stage. And we would get exposure. So I think I had, if you will, that could be a very coaching
Mm-hmm.
exposure around mindset and all the personal growth things.
Mm-hmm.
And fast forward, I would say young adolescent through high school, I was going to these youth group camps that they were full on, so therapeutic. I don't know. So there's an organization in Oakland called Challenge Day, and they're national, and they
Okay.
basically help people They go into schools. They're really trying to combat bullying.
Mm.
And they do it through real vulnerability and stories. So the
Wow.
leaders, they share their personal stories. You have these kids from different so-called cliques.
Oh,
They're
wow.
not necessarily super friends
Yeah.
outside of
Yeah.
whatever school organizational structure. And they break down. I don't know if you've seen in different media.
Mhm.
I think they were the ones that first brought this up, but I've seen it around sprinkled over the last several years. It's this like one exercise would be you have these statements
Okay.
around step across the line. So you have the
Oh, I've
group.
seen those. Yes, I've totally seen those. Yeah.
Yeah. So similar to that, where there's these exercises that break down these walls and really help people see each other, be there for each other. We'd have
Mhm.
these little family groups, what they would call them, and you're sharing and you're processing.
Oh,
So
wow.
it was extremely, I think it was one of the like when we look at the asset
Yep.
program around resilience, I think having that a part of, I mean, I didn't go every single Sunday. It was more of like a part of my life. But these camps I was going to enough that it was a cornerstone
Yeah.
stone. And I think it really contributed, a long-winded answer, but to my sense of what healing and growth and that type of support can offer.
Yeah.
And I don't think I ever really questioned, like,
Sounds like
I
it.
mean,
Yeah.
my mother was like, you could be an attorney or like you could be, different things. But I feel like I stayed because I think it is a sense of purpose for me to be able to make a difference
Mhm.
in other people's lives. And how I do it, I think that could take many forms. I mean,
True.
I love supporting couples. I don't see any need to shift out of that, but I think I could show up in many ways and feel fulfilled
So what I'm
in this.
hearing is later in life you'll go to law school and then finally become an attorney. I don't
No,
think I could argue without crying. I have a lot of respect. I mean, okay, in my personal life, I can argue without crying. I could maybe make somebody else cry, but if I were trying to like passionately defend, I've talked about this on other podcasts too. Like I would have to believe the client and like really have their back. I don't think I'd be a good attorney if somebody were to hire me and I'm like, don't buy their case. I'd be like, why would you do that? That was a bad idea. I'm like, yeah, you should. Like, you should charge them. Like, I would not be that. I would not, whatever kind of lawyer that is, that would not be a good fit for me. But if it was like what was that movie? On the Basis of Sex, about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Fascinating history,
oh,
whether
I should,
whether you like her or
yes.
not. Like fascinating history of how she came to be and just like how tough
I
she
remember I
is. I
wanted to
was
see
like
that.
that I could do. That was an
Yes.
inspirational movie, and good on her. So I could do that
Yes.
kind of law if I had a second
Yes.
career. I could be a mediator. I've thought about that too because
Yes,
the
me
skills
too.
totally translate. And
Yes.
it's not that I would want, and that's the same thing I am with couples. I'm curious on your stance. I was going to ask you this actually today. When I work with couples, sometimes they'll come in, sometimes I call them in like stages. Like sometimes they come in at like stage 2. And it's not so much that they're like we're on death's door, which is like a stage 5, but there's rocky waters, and then usually we're able to navigate out of them because they're not so far in,
Yeah.
the just this raging seas where it's like deep sea fishing. Like we're too intense. That's like a stage 5 where they're like on death's door coming in and like save our relationship, and I'm
I
like,
know.
that's not my job. And also, I don't think every relationship should or does survive couples therapy. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I agree. I think it was the Gottmans that maybe had stated, was it 7 or 6 years that
Hmm.
traditionally, I think this is changing gratefully.
Yeah.
But when I opened up shop in my brick and mortar as a psychologist, this was 2009,
Hmm.
many, many, many people were coming in, and much of what was described was we want to basically have a clear conscience that we've done
Hmm.
everything that we can, but one or
Yeah.
maybe both had actually emotionally already left the relationship and they're
Yes.
kind of doing their so-called due diligence, but
Right.
they're not. There's too many injuries, there's too much exhaustion. They
Hmm.
actually don't have a lot of faith or hope, and that's really hard to work with.
Yes.
And the quote that I remember that just stuck out as like absolutely resonated is from that approach. It's like going to the doctor saying, I broke my arm, and the doctor, and can you help me? And the doctor's like, okay, and tell me more. And they broke their arm like 6 years ago. And they're like,
Yeah.
can you help me? And yes. And it could have helped you so much more.
In a better way. Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I absolutely do think that when people wait too long, it's much more complicated and there's so many more layers and so much less trust. So, in your language around stage 5, stage 2. And as far as people's perception and interpretation, or the partner's perception and
Hmm.
interpretation. I mean, talk about the Gottmans, they talk about this negative sentiment
Oh
override,
yeah.
like that can start to actually be the
Yep.
climate of
Hmm.
the relationship. It's not just
Totally.
the
Yeah.
weather, that it
No.
happens occasionally. It is
Yeah.
what we are living
Yes.
in. And
Yes.
so that is extremely difficult to work with. Not to say it can't be supported and have transformation, but
Sure.
to the interpretation, yes, I think this does kind of lend back to the question about coaching.
Hmm.
I think there is a little bit more active. Well, I think as even a couples therapist, I take
Right.
a very active role. And I guess from an EFT, that's an emotionally
Hmm.
focused training, that one of the language they use is you need to catch some of the bullets. Like when one
Mm.
partner's like
Yeah.
describing the other and it's like super
Negative and
egregious, like
mean. Yeah.
you want to catch that,
Yeah.
not let
Yeah.
them like just
Yep.
start going off. And, just it comes to mind one of my couples sessions yesterday. He was describing, so they have this big decision they're making together.
Hmm.
I'm like, want to make sure I'm
Yeah.
honoring their confidentiality. So it's a big move and it means a lot for them for different reasons. And she's got some obstacles and
Sure.
she was wanting to process with him some of her challenges. He was hearing she doesn't want to move when that was not at all what she had said. So he
Mm.
freaks out. He can't actually attune to
Yeah.
her,
Or process with her. Yeah.
like she's like going to her person of like, I've got
Hmm.
these things and I'm feeling super vulnerable and tender about, and can you be there for me? And he's like lost his ability to respond to her because he's too freaked out that we're not moving. Well, he ended up using some language around distrust because he was
Mm.
describing the emotion is so strong. It's basically the signal that she's sending when she's talking, right? A lot of the
Oh,
communication is nonverbal. So 80
got it.
plus percent. So he's paying attention to her emotion.
Right. Right.
And he was like, I don't know how to still hold what we discussed previously and hold
Mm.
the, and we were, and so she like freaked out about distrust and what does that mean? And so I was like, hold on.
Yeah. Slow
So,
down.
well, it's the congruency,
Yes.
right? Like if we're all lined up, our
Right. The
nonverbals, our
affect and
emotion, and
everything.
if
Right.
it's lined up, that's a clear signal. If
Hmm.
it's mixed messages, I can appreciate there's some uncertainty there.
Hmm.
And so we were kind of softening the language. And really, he needed some reassurance of like, we're still good. And then he could turn towards her.
Right.
So I think of it, yes, interpretation. There's also a lot of um, almost orchestrating the focus so that they don't get lost around these different reactions and stay focused, and also allow them to respond to each other. And
Right.
also name, I can't respond to you. I'm too freaked out. Like that's a
Hmm.
response,
Yeah.
right? So I think I answered your
Yeah.
question.
And I think so many couples they come in with, I think that this was probably earlier generations or earlier decades, that there was a taboo around therapy at all. Unless you were already in the therapy community, then it was cool. It was like the chic thing to do. But it was usually taboo, and something had to be wrong, like really wrong with you to go to therapy. Now it's almost the opposite of like, you're not in therapy, what's wrong with you? Like
Right.
versus back then it's like, you are, what's wrong with you? So with couples, waiting until it's arguably unsalvageable is not the fault of the therapist. At times, an unskilled therapist who, had you seen a different one who was more skilled, that like could have navigated you out, there's no guarantee the relationship would last, but maybe it would have lasted a bit longer than, the early foreclosure. I think couples who, if you're listening to this and you like are a client or you're a therapist, like it's not your job to save the relationship. It's also not one of the clients of one individual of the couple's job to save the relationship. It's the effort of both from the start to almost ensure it doesn't get so bad that you are living in the climate of negative sentiment override that you can't come back from it. And it doesn't mean you can't have fights or conflict, but how can you tend to a garden? If I want an award-winning garden, that's going to start all year, all season. I got to plan for winter. Like there's a lot of thought that goes into it. And I don't think as a society, we were really prepared for the jump and the level of depth and the ask of what partners are really wanting and craving from a relationship. Now that we have financial freedom as women, now that we have the ability to look to a relationship to provide different wants and needs getting met, I've seen a huge shift in the style and type of couples I've worked with, where the gender typically the woman is like, I want more, I want depth, I want to meet you emotionally. They're very in the EFT, like swimming in the language, and the guy's
Yeah.
like meta emotion, there's logic. He's like, well, I'm here, right? Like, obviously I love you, and well, I want you, I want to feel it. Well, I would not be here if I didn't. And I bring in a lot of evolutionary psychology, just
I
how our
love it.
hormones make us think, how men and women really do think and see the world differently. And I see these couples come in, and some of them, they one of them, like you're saying, is mostly checked out, and they waited too long because the other partner now finally is like, okay, I'm ready to make these changes. And the partner who's checked out is like, yeah, sorry, I'm like, I already made other plans. Like, I don't
Yes.
actually want to fall back in love with you, even, or I want to, but now I'm feeling conflicted because what if we fall out of love again?
Hey there, listeners. Are you tired of settling for less than you deserve in your relationships? Do you ever feel like you're not being seen, heard, or valued the way that you want? Or maybe you've been wondering why you keep attracting the same kinds of people into your life, or why certain patterns seem to repeat themselves in your relationships. The answer might be deeper than you think, and you can find it in my new course. Rewire Your Relationships is a transformative course designed to help you stop settling for less than you deserve and start embodying your most confident, assertive, and authentic self in your relationships. You'll explore how your early experiences and parental influences have shaped your views on love, dating, and self-worth. This isn't just about tips and tricks for dating. It's about understanding the core beliefs that drive relationships that you attract. You'll learn how to break free from those old patterns and start creating the kind of connections that truly reflect who you are. Imagine stepping into a relationship with clarity and confidence, knowing you're attracting people who value and respect you for who you really are, your deeply authentic self. The Rewire Your Relationship course gives you the tools to rewrite your relationship story, one where you're no longer settling, but thriving. Visit taliabombola.com/rewireyourrelationships or check the link in the show notes for more.
I'm curious what you've seen shift in the couples work you've done over the last 20 something years. Have you seen the content, why they're coming in change? Have you seen this, like the type of couple, like more heteronormative? Have you seen it like, yeah, I'm just curious what you've seen.
Yeah. Well, I would agree overarching of your description around growing awareness and consciousness around what the real needs are in relationship. And I think with all the attachment research, that's really
Mm-hmm.
supported. So I think people are, with all the podcasts and all the books and videos and ways for
Yeah.
people to consume information, I think people are more informed, which I'm so incredibly grateful for, around attachment styles or tendencies, around trauma, what gets activated. Because when we talk about skilled therapists or not skilled therapists, I think one of the I think it's a continuum. I think it is with every field. You have
Mm-hmm.
amazing attorneys and you'll
Yes.
have maybe
Yes.
not as skilled attorneys.
Yes.
Uh,
Teachers, doctors, absolutely.
totally. And one of the things I think, particularly for couplehood, is really looking at people's threat responses and their reactivity. And that's where I think in the dynamic, a lot of emotional unsafety
Mm-hmm.
occurs. And so people start turning away because they don't know how to resolve it, or they're speaking different coping languages, right? When
Right.
we look at
Right.
the person that tends to pursue and an effort to get reassurance and check like we're good and like
Mm-hmm.
trying to repair, but it feels maybe aggressive or um, even like an attack or intrusion for the person that's a little bit more wanting to feel that things are regulated and
Mm-hmm.
calm, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
look like they start to, when it escalates, shut down or get more
Right.
stonewally.
Right.
So those patterns I see consistent. I don't know that those have changed as much. People being more informed. And also, as you mentioned, expectations. I do think, yes, as far as heteronormative and also the structure of the relationship, I think people are questioning monogamy more.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a poly couple when I was in my practice. And then I've worked with, it's not the majority of people I work with, but I do think just collectively, it's something people are looking at a little bit more around the structure and just more permission around how, for different reasons, right? I do think that secure functioning is we're wired up to feel bonded. Our nervous system really looks to
Right.
bond.
Right.
And when that bond gets threatened, we have that really fight, flight, or freeze response, hence what we were talking about
Mm-hmm.
with the level of reactivity and threat. So however people choose to negotiate those bonds, I am looking at supporting that bonding and that bond. Usually it's most of my clients are in a monogamous relationship, but people step out, and this is often a reason why
Mm-hmm.
people have injury and repair.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's a big conversation, but I couldn't, just bigger picture, couldn't agree with you more around where we're at in history as far as just the logistics of surviving and how we need each other, don't need each other. I think around when we look at gender norms, and I will say too, when we look at gender, when we're looking at just evolution, whether or not we're talking about masculine energy, feminine energy, however somebody identifies as with their sexual orientation or sexual identity, the men's experience of the masculine, I remember coming across some research around men have the same capacity brain wise for empathy. It's just their channel of communicating is different. And I do think there's evolutionary differences that play a role, and just how to, again, support that safety and communicating and really responding to each other. And that often, I think, really why we're bonding now is for emotional intimacy, both if we're going to talk about binary men and women.
Yeah, I think like you were mentioning, the evolution, as you were saying that, it dawned on me, there probably wasn't a survival instinct as a man to empathize, because you're quietly hunting, and if you ever spoke, you'd give away your location and a lion would eat you.
Yeah, pretty
There's
much
that, but as women, it's like gathering, it's very stereotypical. We're like, don't eat that berry, eat this fruit. Like, communication is literally how we survived, and that's what we translate and take with us into our friendships or relationships. And then I think the key is not expecting the exact same, or the understanding that it should, or I desire it to be the exact same. And there may be growth on both ends, right? Heteronormative example, he could come closer and understand, oh, she's sharing this with me because she trusts me. When we give, one of my mentors calls it berry picking, when we like, oh, we got this in the forest and we this, metaphorically. And my mom used to do this all the time growing up. When she'd get home, oh, I went to lunch with so-and-so. You remember so-and-so? 5-minute backstory. And I'm like, oh, there's the point. Okay. Because if we don't know what the point is, I don't know how to listen to you. And a lot of the women I work with in coaching, I almost have to, like, I tell them I'm going to train them to think more like a man, not to act like a man, but like, I need you to get to the point. If we're on Voxer and you just tell me this there's time limits on it, but like, if you tell me this 3-minute story and at the end you're like, so yeah, and then you end it, why the heck did I just listen to that? Like, if you say, I need to know your thoughts on this date, or I need to know your thoughts on this fight I had with my partner. Then you tell me, then I'm attuned and I know how to listen. So I empathize with the men in my office and the couples that I work with a lot, because she'll be going on and I interrupt and I'm like, I'm sorry, I want to be with you in this. What are we listening for?
Yes.
Let us know what we can best listen for. And that has helped a lot of the couples I've worked with shift the way they talk to each other. Like, lead with the point, land the plane first. Don't let the person be wandering through the airport and like, oh, we had a flight today. Like, yes, like, I would like to listen to you, or we're asking at the wrong time. We're trying to have a deep conversation with our partner. They're in the middle of doing something else. They aren't good at multitasking, but we do everything meanwhile all the time. The mental load, we constantly have this list. Thanks a lot, estrogen, right? It's the worst. And then we expect them to think the same way. And that's not the way testosterone functions. It's single focus. And we get locked in like that as women too. But it's not until after menopause that we can relate to how men experienced the world. And again, my mentor it's like when you're sitting there and you hear kind of like the Charlie Brown, like, wah, 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 wah. That's what it's like when we're in single focus, when we're shifted into, this is what my main focus is. I'm tuning out the rest of the world, which sometimes includes my partner when they're coming to me. So revolutionary here, but like, ask, is this a good time? I have something I really want to share with you. Does now work? No, it doesn't. And don't take that personally. Like, they don't love me. Like, there's no need for the dramatics, is what I tell my clients. I'm like, you can be hurt. I validate the upset that you didn't feel attuned to in that moment, but to be over dramatic in response and think that they're abandoning you is just not true, because usually the second sentence out of their mouth is, no, but how about 5 o'clock? But the person's already so in flight and checked out that they didn't even hear that. That's where it's like, be able to ground yourself and tolerate this person's best time to receive might not be when you're ready to give. and then
For
learning
sure.
to compromise and negotiate. Oh, okay, sure. 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock rolls around. Your partner walks in. Hey, what did you want to talk to me about earlier? Conflict avoided versus me gently bullying them into being like, no, now is a good time. We need to talk about it right now. Like, what
Yes.
kind of conversation do you want to have? That's what I
Yes.
ask my couples. Do you want to just get it over with? Talk at each other all day. Do you want to have a productive conversation? You need to schedule a time for it.
Yes, I would agree with that. It's interesting reflecting on my experience. And as you mentioned, expectations and what we're hoping for a partner to provide when we talk about heteronormative dynamics. When I was really trying to be conscious of my tendencies with my then boyfriend, now husband,
Yeah.
I was like, I really need to journal all of my unpacking because it's all important to me. He just can't come along for the ride.
No.
And I will get to my distilled,
Yes.
oh, that's what
Yes.
matters most to me. And it's vulnerable. And then I would give him that nugget.
Mm-hmm.
Super scary, not easy to do, super hard
Practice.
because it feels like the thing that's like, I don't know if this is lovable. I don't know if this is okay, if you're going to turn away. But if I can give him, it's almost like I had somebody reflect back. It's like a diamond. Like I have to kind of mine around all the stuff and then this diamond. And then I have yet to feel him turn away when I do that. I'm not always great at it. Like sometimes I'm wanting to process with him, but for the most, and I honestly, this was more in the early years. I don't necessarily feel as activated. The other thing, conversely, for the more masculine, there are times in session that I will ask for more words, just as their partner has shared. Often the tendency, you probably know this, is to kind of fix or to go into solution mode.
Yeah.
And
well,
I was like, can you tell
me? If you wouldn't
me?
feel that way, then we wouldn't have to talk about this. Then I can go back to doing what I was doing. So just stop doing it.
Or just caring deeply.
Yes, there's the caring deeply, but there's also the solution of like, well, if you just did this and you'd feel different, then we could move on. We could enjoy more of the time. That's at least what I've seen.
Yes. I would say often before that solution offer, if I asked them to slow down, can you tell me what was happening before you went to that?
Right.
It was, I see that you're hurting. It sounds really painful. I care deeply and I want to help, but none of that is stated.
Right.
And I'm like, would you be willing to say that? Right.
Very helpful.
And it is a game changer. I've had men be like, I just have to state the obvious. And I'm like,
but that's
it's so helpful.
For
it's
them,
so helpful.
Obvious. I wouldn't, if I didn't care about you and love you and it didn't affect me to see you in pain, I wouldn't bother to use my energy and waste my most precious resource of time to give you a solution. That's that back of the mind, like the evolutionary drive. And for women, we feel left out, we feel abandoned, we feel misheard or not met in that moment because, like you're saying, I just had to state the obvious. It's like, yes, what's obvious to you might not be obvious to your partner and vice versa. And like you were saying with the mining and the diamond, I've always given, it's like the analogy of labor and delivery. Labor's the gross, like messy, like, screw you, you did this to me. How could you? Like hours of pain and this. And then the delivery's like, oh my God, look at this thing we made. That's what your partner wants.
Yes.
This is obviously not a completely apt metaphor because there's many partners who are great through labor and delivery, but it's that what am I working towards? What am I this? And then I finally birth what I need to give to my partner. And it's like, oh, this is the vulnerability that I need to lead with. That's often discovered, fight, conflict, this, that, the next day when we have some time to think, you know what, I'm really sorry. It ended up being this. And I should have, that, whatever most couples end up doing that as their pattern, just start with it. And that is journaling or mining on your own and then leading with that. It is scary as hell. It totally is. But that's true vulnerability, is the susceptibility to be hurt or wounded. It's showing your underbelly. It's with dogs. Dogs don't show their puppy belly to somebody that they don't trust. And it's the exact opposite.
Yes. And it's a lot to ask the partner. And I would say, just to back up a moment, I know I genderized that fixing it example. I see a lot of women do that are very living in their head. I know I do it too.
I do it all the time.
I do it all the time too. And my husband wants to feel heard and seen and responded to emotionally. So it's not, again, I think this is something very human that we all want to feel heard and seen. And when we rush to fix or solution mode, that tends to bypass that which is so critical when we talk about emotional intimacy, like that
Yes.
bonding.
Yes.
And we can, when we're together and we understand each other, that's where we can move together and be creative and
Yes.
solve solutions. And to your point,
Exactly.
get to these two beautiful things that we can then say, okay, this is what matters to you. This is what matters to me. And we work together.
It wasn't portrayed for us in media. What was portrayed for us in media is very stereotypic Enneagram 5 guy who's heady and logical and the thinker and not emotional at all, and the Enneagram 2 woman, the helper, the giver, the martyr, let me overfunction almost for my whole family. Look at all I've done for you, either weaponized or used as like, I would like more appreciation for that. And that was kind of the template, at least for American history, that was the template for a lot of sitcoms and what families looked like. That is not the case anymore. We have a large advancement in media. And sometimes I think for a lot of other people in society, like the pendulum swung almost too far too soon. And that's what we're seeing, that there are some couples who fall into more traditional, not necessarily man, woman, but like traditional roles in the sense of like one person is the provider, one person is the child caregiver. I'm not saying just man or woman for that. And then there's other couples who are rocking it and they have some of the traditional, some of the new age roles, that they don't have the gender norms. They've really mastered, let's share the art of the mental load. It shouldn't all fall on one partner. And I would be curious for you and the couples that you've seen, if that topic of the mental load comes up with the clients, whether they use that word or not. Like, is that a plight you see some couples go through, that one partner is doing it all the time and the other partner's like, what are you talking about? Like, it's why are you so worried? It's like, you don't worry at all because I take care of everything. Like, I don't know if you see that with the people you work with.
Absolutely. I've actually been a guest around that topic and just helping unpack all of that. It's very much prevalent in my opinion.
Yes. Yeah. And I think for so many of the couples, if you're listening to this and you happen to be one of those couples, this is where social media can help you. There are a lot of Instagram accounts that are targeted towards how do you talk to your partner about the mental load. And I highlight when I've ever been interviewed about it, a part of it is biological. It is what estrogen causes us to do. It's a kinship hormone. It's a bonding hormone. We do things, meanwhile, we're a list. And then I have to grow, like, it's just how we see the world. It's not to say, just like we were chatting earlier, there's girls who are like, let me just fix it. It's not to say that the other skills can't be learned, but they're for anybody. And mostly there has to be a buy-in to want to change. So if I'm the overfunctioner in the relationship and I'm always balancing the mental load, and my partner never either has the opportunity, or when they ask them, they actually are willing to do it, and then I criticize them because they didn't do it the right way. We're not talking about weaponized incompetence. That's a whole other episode that we could do. But there is a give and a take, I think, to share that. And the purpose of asking for help is not so that the other person does it exactly your way. It's so that you don't have to do it. And that's a lot of the work I do with couples, is understanding like, oh, it's not that they're going to be a little minion and be like a mini me and do it. I'm like, no, like, it's just so that's not on your plate anymore. And then who are you if you're not over functioning? That's the real identity work with a lot of the couples that I have. Like, what would it be like if both of you were just moderately functioning well, not one person is giving 100 and one person's getting 100? And that's the rebalancing that I see couples go through.
There's so much in what you're describing. I don't know that we're going to be able to give it full justice.
Part
but
two.
when we, right. I mean, when we look at the value of some of the traditional, there's what can feel clear, right? We know what we're doing. It's not this extra, and things that are less clear, like this mental load, like we don't even know what each other are really holding and feeling responsible for. And stereotypically, I mean, when I talk about this, I raise my hand that there are times where I'm very aware of the imbalance or the inequity. And yet, to your point, the estrogen of like, but I love, and this is like my way, my love language of like wanting to buy groceries or meal plan or cook. And then I'm like, times where I'm like, this isn't fair. And so it's like, it's really being aware inside myself too, around what I'm participating in. And I interviewed someone and I thought he had a really great suggestion based on what him and his wife do. And he said, actually, their roles, she's got I think she's a surgeon and I can't remember what type of surgeon, but she's like working crazy long hours. And they've made a choice, and they've had different phases in their relationship. So there's times where his career is more prioritized, and then they made a conscious choice to prioritize her career. And so he was doing a lot more of the domestic. And he was really talking about developing systems and how that can be really helpful. And one of the things two things. One thing that I was going to first say that I thought was helpful is to the mental load reduction, and that of like the invisible work that we're trying to think of everything, is if one person can own something from beginning to end.
Yes. Yes.
That we don't have to recreate. We're not curious, like, because it's like this idea of like one partner's like, well, I offer to help, but I'm like, it's not that
I need
helpful.
You to just take it on. I don't need help. It's not my job. Help implies that it's my role entirely. I need you to do it.
Or if I have to tell you how to do it and the whole thing, I can just do it, right? Like it's the same amount of effort. Yep. So he's like, if you can own it beginning to end. And the other thing he talked about around equity is equity of leisure time, which I had never thought about until he had said that, because if someone's got to hire, like they're working more, and one partner would be like, well, that's on them. They kind of want to work more. But if the equity of leisure, one person's not getting that. I mean, obviously these are joint decisions around the family, and especially when we have children and the whole thing. So, but to include that in how one is maybe assessing the overall look on this when we're unpacking. But yes, I've had clients that have talked about in session, like, we had to write down everything we do. And it was like the amount of things that one did versus something. I mean, that's a lot of work, but it can be hugely illuminating.
Yeah. It's, I think, easier for couples to get Eve Rodsky's Fair Play card deck. Even just bringing it in your home. And this is my own experience with it with my ex, hence why he's my ex. I remember first bringing it into the house, and there was just this like staring at it vibe. And I'm like, oh no, we're doing this. And he's like begrudging. And it was like a fight to even sit down and do the cards. And I was like, oh no, like what have I done? But it was actually much easier to highlight, like, oh, you don't want this to change. Like, you want it to be traditional. You basically want me to be your mom. And I'm not going to ever, you've known that. I've never been like that. I'm not, no disrespect to his mom, but that's never going to be me, literally or figuratively. I don't want to show up like that. And sometimes, and sometimes when you're in a relationship, the one person is like, no, I want to change. I want to make these strides. Like, let's be more, equitable. Let's both have leisure, and the other person's like, no, like this the way the system is currently benefits me, and I'm the most important person in the world. So we're just going to keep it this way. And then for the couples I've worked with where it's like that, then I just say, like, you two, have some tough decisions to make. I'm happy to be there with you to help you through those, or you can work with these, individual referrals separately and come back. And I get some emails of like, we were able to work it out and we're not together. Or I get some emails of like, we were able to go do our individual work. Now we're ready to start couples therapy again with a new lens of what issues to tackle. So
yes, and
either way you slice it, it can help to have that individual support too.
Yes. Because like, what do these things represent? Like, does it mean, oh, I'm doing this type of work? Or, there can be a lot of things wrapped up into that. But I love that suggestion because it's a resource that gets people out of the description. And I think this is the only thing I was going to say maybe earlier. I don't remember, but it's a lot to ask for somebody to be on the ride and listen to the description that can be very, for one, seeming like a mischaracterization.
True.
So if one's trying to approach this topic and then they're trying to explain, the person on the receiving end is likely going to get defensive or like, it's not like that or this and that, but to have a body of wisdom.
It's a neutral entity that gets projected onto. Yes, definitely. So I would recommend that. And I would love to have you on again to dive deeper into some of these, if that's possible to be on the docket for you in the new year. I know we're wrapping up the end. I can't believe it's already November. That's wild to me. So if you want, we could touch base again to dive more deeply into this. But I want to say thank you. And I want to ask where people can find you if they want to learn more from you.
Thank you. My website is drjessicahiggins.com. That's doctor with a DR. And there's so much there to support.
You have a great website.
Well,
The design
actually,
is gorgeous.
well, that's very lovely of you to say. I actually have been in a rebranding process. We had a personal debacle that was, I think, but I won't go into the story of that. That was in 2022, and I had started the rebranding. Anyway, 2 years later, it's going to be launched. My new website is going to be launched next week.
Perfect.
Which by the time this is aired, it'll probably already
brand
be
new.
out. So
yeah. So your brand new, already done website is what they're going to visit. Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you again. I greatly appreciate your time, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Heal Through Humor. If you like the show, can you please go on your favorite platform and like, rate, review, subscribe, all of the terms that we usually throw out. I would really appreciate it, and I would love to get more listeners just like you in front of the podcast. And if you have an idea for a guest, please feel free to DM me at Talia Bombola. I would love to hear from you. Until then, I will see you on the next episode. Take care.